Right, well, you join us today on another one of our field trips heading towards Glasgow city centre. We're going to look at transport problems and solutions in Glasgow city centre. Now, the question that we'll be faced with is, how do cities in developing countries deal with their traffic problems? And we've got two elements to that. The first element is what are the problems that are there, and then the solutions. But then the second element is to evaluate the effectiveness of them. How well have they actually addressed the problems? And those two questions are really intrinsically tied together. To properly address the problem, the solution has to fit the problem. And so if we're explaining how the transport solution works, if it fits the problem, if we can show how it addresses the problem, then that's also evaluating it as well. There's very little difference between them, except for perhaps if we put some empirical data in there, like say how much it's reduced traffic or how much it's improved quality of life. But other than that, it's the same story. So we have to have a good understanding of what is causing the traffic problems, and then the solutions. How have those solutions tried to tackle the underlying causes of traffic congestion? And Glasgow city centre is like all city centres around the world where it has this issue of too much traffic. It's a victim of its own success, if you like. Remember, city centres are route hubs. That's where traditionally roads travel towards. It's where main train lines go and bus routes go towards the city centre, and that attracts traffic, and then that becomes an issue. Secondly to that, it's the main business centre of the city. It's where most people work, it's where most commerce takes place, it's where most industry. When I say industry, people will think of factories, but when we mean industry, we mean anything that's done for money, basically. And so Glasgow city centre has lots of offices and shops which attract lots of workers from across the city and out with the city to work there, and also to go there for business. So again, another factor in causing the problems of traffic congestion in Glasgow city centre. And it does not help, it's exacerbated, it's made worse by the fact that most people tend to work the same core hours, tend to start around 9 o'clock in the morning, tend to finish around 5 o'clock in the evening, which leads to this problem of rush hours. And rush hour traffic is a problem known across the world in all developed cities, because we have fallen into this practice of starting work at the same time and ending work at the same time. Now, there's business reasons for that. There's no point in you opening up your business and you try to do business with another company that's not open at the same time as you are. So it makes sense when businesses are open at similar times. However, that inflexibility of working times leads to major issues. So far we've got, it's a route hub, it's the major centre for business and commerce, and most people tend to start and stop work at the same times. Now, another factor of city centres is that they tend to be the main areas for entertainment and recreation, in terms of restaurants, cinemas, nightclubs, pubs, and then therefore they have a large attraction for that entertainment and recreation. And then finally, Glasgow city centre especially is a world-class shopping destination, which again attracts lots of people to the city centre. So another element that's causing so much demand for transport within the city centre. So just the fact that Glasgow city centre has so much shopping, has so much restaurants, cinemas and entertainment venues like the theatres, that attracts lots of people from Glasgow and far beyond. Now, those are the sort of underlying attractions that cause so many people to go into the city. You think of that as the sort of the demand. We also need to think about the supply. How do people get to the city centre? And Glasgow city centre is built, like many industrialised countries, just on one side of a river, and that river forms a natural barrier for people getting from one side of the city to the other. So if you're in the south of the city, to get into the city centre, you have to go across one of the few bridges that there are, or through the Clyde Tunnel, and then along the Clydeside Expressway. So we have natural bottlenecks of people trying to get into the city, and that's a bit of an issue. Rather than having numerous ways in and out of the city, we then limit people to just a few key routes, which squeezes everybody into the same place, which again causes traffic congestion. Now, to alleviate some of that traffic congestion, historically, Glasgow sought to increase the capacity of ways that they could get people across the River Clyde. So we did that with the building of the Kingston Bridge. The Kingston Bridge was built to get more people through the city centre, into the city centre and across the M8. And even today, it's still one of the busiest road bridges in Europe, with something like 155,000 cars passing every day. And we built the Clyde Tunnel, and the Clyde Tunnel again to provide another route across the River Clyde, but wouldn't mean that you'd have to go into the city centre to travel across the Clyde. We could travel further down, so people travelling from Partick and Paisley wouldn't have to go into the city centre, they could just go straight across the river. And that again brought down some of the demand for transport in the city centre. But what we'll do is we'll stop, and I'll come back to you when I'm a bit closer to Glasgow. So rather than take a car into the city centre and make the problems that we were talking about worse, what I've done is come to Bridge Street subway station, where they have a park and ride scheme. And park and ride schemes are one of the systems that have been set up to try and reduce the amount of traffic in Glasgow city centre. What I was able to do is park here for all day for £5.70, and that includes the price of transport into the city centre. That's far cheaper than parking in the city centre itself for that same amount of time. So let's jump in the subway and get into Glasgow city centre. So just a few minutes later, and we are here in Glasgow city centre in St Neots Square, and I have to say it was a lot easier than trying to find car parking spaces in the city centre, and so far cheaper as well. Parking in Glasgow city centre for a few hours is going to be a lot more expensive than that was. And the next thing that we have to look at is the structure behind me. Not only was the park and ride scheme brought in, but also the redevelopment of many of the subway stations in Glasgow. So now we have this glass and metal structure, and more importantly a lift that will take you downstairs and escalators on the other side to make the whole place much more easily accessible, much more attractive to be in, and just somewhere much more inviting. And again, that's what we're trying to do, is encourage people to use public transport, not by just taking punitive measures about making it too expensive to park in the city centre, but also making it more attractive to use places like this, St Neots Centre. So here we are on Buchanan Street, and it'll be no surprise to most of you that this is one of the pedestrianised streets here in Glasgow. And pedestrianisation was actually a method brought in to try and deal with the problems of traffic. Now previously in National 5 we taught you that pedestrianisation was about attracting customers back into Glasgow city centre, and that is indeed true. But if we think about the problems of traffic congestion, what we're thinking about is the unhealthy air pollution that comes off it, the noise pollution, and the general sense of stress and unpleasantness that too much traffic has. And if we're trying to improve the quality of Glasgow city centre and fight against traffic congestion, then pedestrianisation is a key way that we can do that. I'm now currently walking along the middle of what was Buchanan Street, and apart from a couple of bicycle delivery people, the chances of me getting hit by a car are virtually nil. So pedestrianisation goes a long way towards improving the quality of life in Glasgow city centre. It does, however, have some drawbacks. The drawbacks are you decrease the capacity for roads because, well, this road is now effectively no longer in use, and really all you do is shift the traffic to some other part of the city. So the remaining roads that are still functional for traffic end up having to deal with more traffic than would have been there before. So there's an argument could be made that it's increasing traffic congestion on the remaining roads. But I think we could all agree that it's a far more pleasant place to walk down than this next street. This is Union Street, and Union Street for many years was the most polluted street in Glasgow, and the reason for its pollution was also the reason for its traffic congestion. It's one of the main bus routes in and out of Glasgow because just at the bottom of this road there's one of the road bridges that crosses the river. But also what further compounds it is the nature of Glasgow's street pattern. We should know that Glasgow is built on a gridiron street pattern, and this road, like many of these roads in Glasgow, runs north-south, but the prevailing wind in Glasgow goes west to east. So we never got much wind blowing up and down this road, and buses are usually diesel engines put out a lot of particulate matter, and that particulate matter is the soot, the smog that would sit in between these high buildings and never get displaced. And so Union Street for many years was the most polluted street in all of Europe. Glasgow City Council had to do something about it, and so far, as you can see, there's a huge reduction in traffic. And the reason for that reduction in traffic is what's at the top of this road. This is now a road that is only allowed to be used by buses and taxis. They've put in what's called a bus gate. A bus gate ultimately is a big red line across the road with a traffic camera, and if you drive across that red line in anything other than a bus or a taxi, you get hit with a £60 fine automatically. No matter what time of day it is, doesn't matter if you know the city or not, if you cross that red line, you're fined. Now that's had a couple of impacts. One, you can see buses are flowing pretty easily. You don't have to go back too many years before those buses would have pulled out into a queue of other buses and other traffic jostling for position. But now the buses move, so therefore we have less waiting around of buses putting out more and more smog, and less other traffic going down here as well. So ultimately it is a far nicer place, just not as pleasant as Buchanan Street. So here we are at Waterloo and Wellington Street, and you've often heard us say that Glasgow City Centre is built on a gridiron street pattern, and this is an example of it. Streets running north-south, east-west. And one of the issues with a gridiron street pattern is so many interchanges or junctions. One behind me, another one here, and it continues on every 60 or 70 metres there seems to be another junction, which causes a real problem if you're trying to turn right. If this was a normal road rather with traffic in both directions, if you're trying to turn right at this junction up ahead, then I would need to come out onto this lane, stay in this lane, wait to turn right until all incoming traffic had cleared, and that creates a backlog behind me, and that backlog slows down traffic. But if we change the road into one way so that traffic comes just in the one direction, we can use all of the lanes for traffic in that one direction. Therefore, turning right at this next junction means that I simply move into the right-most lane and turn right whenever I need to. That speeds up the flow of traffic. So putting in one-way systems is really about increasing the capacity of the roads that we already have. The capacity of this road now, which is measured in VMUs, which is vehicle units per hour, that capacity is increased because now we don't have traffic causing problems when it tries to turn from a major onto a minor road. It just turns whenever it wants to. Another way that we create capacity on this road is this. Double yellow lines. Previously, historically, this had been parking along here, and what we would have had in that situation is parked cars, one live lane of traffic, and that live lane of traffic would have had another one on the other side, and then more parking on the other side of the road. When we did away with the parking, we put in double yellow lines. What happens is we open up another lane of traffic and we increase the capacity of the road yet again. That meant in this case we could actually turn this lane into a bus lane and still maintain another lane of live traffic in the centre of the road. So double yellow lines increase the capacity, the throughput of traffic on your roads. One-way systems increase the capacity, they speed up the amount, they increase the amount of throughput of traffic on the roads. Now that goes against what the last couple of things that we looked at. When we put in bus lanes, it increases the ability of buses to get through the city, making buses more attractive, but making personal cars less attractive. This is almost opposite to that, isn't it? Where this is actually trying to alleviate the problem of traffic congestion, which makes it more attractive to use a car. Now, I have to say that that is a scheme that was brought in originally, and it's not the type of system that has been put in place now. Glasgow is now no longer trying to alleviate the problems of traffic congestion by increasing capacity. We're now trying to alleviate the problems of traffic congestion by making it unfeasible to bring in cars into the city centre, to the extent where as of the next year, 2022 I believe, we will no longer allow certain diesel cars to come into the city centre. So if you have a diesel car that was made before 2014, in a year or two it will no longer be welcomed in Glasgow city centre. So to recap then, what have we covered so far? Park and ride schemes make it more attractive for people to leave their car outside the city, jump onto a subway at Bridge Street and get into the city centre in just a few minutes. It's also cheaper. There's been a large scale revamping of the subway stations. Primarily the most noticeable one is St Enoch's, which looks much better. So it looks more attractive, it's more pleasant to use, but it's also increased accessibility because they put in lifts and escalators, which makes it easier for people with disabilities or the infirm. We've looked at the bus gates that were put into Union Street. The bus gates increase the flow of buses so that buses are no longer sitting in traffic jams, which reduces the amount of particulate matter. And particulate matter is a very important type of pollution because it's one of the most damaging to people's lungs and health. So it reduces the amount of particulate matter, making Union Street, which was previously the most polluted street in Europe, now a much more pleasant place to be. We then moved on to looking at the gridiron street pattern in Glasgow and how that gridiron street pattern was dealt with by introducing one-way systems, which increase the flow of traffic, increase the capacity of traffic through a one-way system, through a gridiron street pattern rather, and the introduction of double yellow lines on the city centre streets to remove on-street car parking. When we remove on-street car parking, we increase the capacity of the road to get more traffic through it, therefore reducing traffic congestion. Also, we walked up Buchanan Street, which has been pedestrianised, which again is about increasing the quality of the environment in Glasgow city centre. We get away from the pollution, we get away from the noise, and make it a safer environment for everybody involved. Now, we should also be thinking about evaluative comments. That is, have these systems worked? And there is no clear answer to that. Yes, they've worked in Union Street. It is a much cleaner place to be, much more pleasant place to be. But there is a negative side to that as well, and the negative side is that a lot of Glaswegians really don't like it. Bus gates have been very contentious in Glasgow because they're seen by a lot of people as a money grabbing exercise by Glasgow City Council. Bus gates are, although there's a big red line on the ground, a lot of people don't see them, drive through them, and many Glaswegians, including myself, have been fined £60 for the privilege of driving down a street that they always used to drive down. And that creates a lot of ill will and ill feeling. And that's something that when we are planning cities, we have to bear in mind. Cities are for people. And when you're planning, you should reflect the wants and the desires and the cultural needs of that people. And therefore they have to come with you. They have to be part of that journey, pardon the pun. And if we don't take people with us, if we don't have people believing in the cause, then it will fail. Politicians will be removed and replaced by other politicians that speak more for the people of the city, and those politicians will inform the planning process, and the changes that were made will be reversed. So ultimately, bus gates, although they have had a very positive impact, have had quite a negative impact on the overall perception of planning in Glasgow. So here we are in George Square looking at Queen Street Station. And Queen Street Station, the third busiest station in all of Scotland, has been had ongoing works on for the last couple of years, trying to redevelop it to increase its capacity. Platforms 2 and 3 were extended, the front facade has been totally renovated, and the goal was to increase its ability to deal with the ever-increasing demands from more and more passengers, because we want to be able to increase the way that people can get into Glasgow city centre easily and cheaply and without bringing their cars. So now Queen Street Station can accept trains that have 8 carriages, whereas previously it couldn't do that. So although we haven't increased the number of tracks, we've increased the capacity of the trains that are coming in. Also, as you can see, it's a much more modern looking building, makes it more attractive, and it's also been designed now to be much more accessible as well. So it's more attractive, it's more accessible, and the capacity that it now offers in terms of the number of passengers per train has been increased. All the things that we need to do if we want to decrease the amount of cars, because if we decrease the amount of cars, we have to increase the other facilities that people can use to get into the city centre. Now the next thing we're going to look at is other ways that we can get around the city centre, and it's using the Next Bike Hire scheme. These are dotted around Glasgow, and you can see that there is loads of stations all around Glasgow city centre and further afield, all the way out towards Shawlands as well. In fact, there's some just down from our school. And what I'm going to do now is get a bike and go around the city centre and see how friendly it is towards cycling. Now, I love cycling, I always have loved cycling. I think it's the most efficient way of getting around most places. And I've always felt very comfortable cycling in busy roads, competing with traffic. I don't really have any fear of being on open roads, but most people are not like that. And if we are trying to encourage people to cycle, we have to create an environment that people are willing to cycle in. And when you speak to most people about cycling, they are just they're most concerned about safety and what will happen to them if a car hits them, or it's just too dangerous, or I don't feel confident, or I haven't been on a bike in years. And the way that we can go about addressing that is to put in cycle lanes and to separate people from traffic. Green light. So cycling infrastructure is something that has to be manufactured, has to be built in, has to be designed into the fabric of every city if you want to get people to go by bike. And putting in bike hire schemes is all well and good, but if people are too frightened to go onto the roads, then the bikes just sit at the side of the road, rotting and rusting. So far this bike has been free for me to rent. Glasgow City Council has made it free for everyone to use bikes for 30 minutes. Up until March this year, up until March 2021, it's free to ride a bike. You just have to register for the scheme. And so far, out in Glasgow City Centre, I've seen almost as many people on these rental bikes as I've seen on cars. And I've seen much more people on these rental bikes than I have on their own bikes. So, that whole way over, sorry for the wind noise and the traffic noise, but it's where we are. That whole way over, no help for cyclists, no cyclepaths. There are plenty of cyclepaths around Glasgow, but clearly not everywhere. And what we were doing was coming from Glasgow City Centre out to here, Charing Cross, heart of Glasgow's business centre, and to this behind me, which is the Kingston Bridge. The Kingston Bridge, 155,000 cars a day in most days, and one of the few cities where a motorway goes right through the very centre of it. Now, a motorway passing through the centre of a city was groundbreaking at the time, perhaps now not the best idea, because what that meant was that for decades, any traffic that was coming in the M74, which was coming in from England, had to come onto the M8 and through the Glasgow city centre if it wanted to continue on going out further west, which was unsustainable. So thankfully, due to the completion of the M74 extension, traffic no longer has to come in down through the M74 onto the M8 and across the Kingston Bridge. Now, the M74 takes all that traffic to the south of here and it bypasses Glasgow city centre. So, major infrastructure works like the M74 extension took away hundreds of thousands of vehicles, actually millions of vehicles from Glasgow city centre every year. Now, what I came looking for was this on-street car parking. It hasn't been done away with in Glasgow city centre, though it has been greatly reduced. There used to be quite a lot of on-street car parking in Glasgow city centre, but like we said, it was replaced with double yellow lines so that we could increase the capacity of the roads. But where there is still some car parking available, we have done this to it. Now, to park in Glasgow city centre, it's £1 per 15 minutes with a maximum of a 2-hour stay. Therefore, it's really only incredibly temporary parking that's here, and very expensive. What we did do was this. What we did was replace it with things like this. This is a multi-storey off-street car park. Therefore, if we get the cars off of the roadside into a multi-storey, we take them out of the flow of traffic, increasing the capacity of traffic in the city centre, because at the moment it is just not feasible to completely eradicate cars from the city centre. We do need to maintain some facility for cars to come in, and if they are coming in, we have to give them somewhere to be parked and stored. Therefore, off-street car parking sites like this one's run by Q Park. We also have NCP car parks across the city as well, all multi-storey, all off of the street, and all particularly expensive to park for the day, although not as expensive as parking on the street. And here we have the first biking infrastructure that we've came across in our cycle. Unfortunately for me, it wasn't going in the direction or to the place that I wanted it to go to. That's us almost finished with our tour around Glasgow city centre. So that is us back at Bridge Street subway station in the park and ride, without using the subway to come back, but just rather bringing back the next bike and parking it at one of the local next bike parking stations. And we get back in the car without having taken the car into the city centre. So it's really up to you to agree whether or not Glasgow City Centre's, Glasgow City Council's policy on traffic management has been working. It's hard to tell at the moment from visiting the city centre because of the current restrictions and there's so little traffic being there. But the things that I have noticed over my years of being in Glasgow is that the number of people cycling in the city is hugely increased. One of the things that we didn't see was the vast improvements that's been made to cycling provision along the Clyde side, and how renovated that area's become, allowing direct access from people from the west end of the city to cycle along the River Clyde, which is in flat land, all the way in to the city centre. But what we did see was still a lack of put together cycling infrastructure that would allow people to get around the city and away from the traffic. That still hasn't really came to fruition yet. It's still a long way off. What I did notice was that there is a lot more thought put into bus lanes and provision for public transport than there is for just people cycling. Now, if you're happy and confident cycler, that's fine, but if you're not confident and you don't want to be in amongst live traffic, then there's still a bit of an issue with bringing bikes into the city centre. Certainly it's not like one of the European cities like Amsterdam or Utrecht, where people are happy to take their children cycling in the city centre. Here, I don't think many people would be happy with small children cycling in the city centre. But that's been it. That's our road trip around Glasgow City. Hopefully you found it helpful with examples and case study, and it's time for me to go home. So, as always, look after yourselves and each other, and I'll see you soon. Bye.